We okay, ready to go, Will? Okay. Good morning. It is Tuesday, March 11th, 2025. It is 10 a.m. and this is a special meeting of the Jefferson Public Utility District Board of Commissioners. My name is Jeff Randall. I am president of the board and calling this meeting to order. Jefferson PUD will be offering both virtual online meetings as well as in-person meetings unless advance notice is provided. Online participant audio will be muted upon entry. Please unmute at the appropriate time to speak. And if you're calling in, use *6 to mute and unmute and *9 to raise a hand to request to speak. So let's do a roll call. My name is Jeff Randall. I am president of the board and commissioner for District 1.
Kenneth Collins, Commissioner, District 2.
Dan Tupper, Commissioner for District 3.
We're all kind of congested this morning.
Yeah.
So we have an executive session and a couple of other items on our agenda. Is it good to go or do we need to amend it? Okay. Can we have a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
Quick question on the agenda. Did you two receive the email from Mr. Tiersch about Markets Plus?
I did. And
we want to try and talk about that a little bit today or no? I don't think it's going to have any impact on FCS in the short term here. So
I responded to him
Okay.
with what I knew about it. And I think we could maybe, pick it up at the next board meeting if we want to cover it in reports.
Okay.
That's been going on for a year and it'll keep going on for a year. So
like I say, I don't think it's going to impact what we're hearing today or what the work they're doing. So
okay. So we have a motion.
Yep, I'll second the motion.
Second the motion. All in favor of approving the agenda, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Okay. So the first item is the executive session. And Kevin, you would like approximately how long?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay. So the executive session is for the purpose of under RCW 42.30.110 subsection 1 subsection G to evaluate the qualifications of an applicant for public employment. And we will be in executive session until approximately 10:12. We are now going into executive session. All right, it is 10:11 and we have completed our executive session. So the next item on our agenda is the FCS electrical rate update.
And I'm going to start real quick. We have Paul, and I believe I saw Sergey's on here. There are FCS team that's putting all this information together for us for our rate study. This presentation is very brief. It is to get very specific direction from the board on some increases moving forward so they can go on to the next step. And we appreciate them being here on short notice and putting this together to help get to the next step. Sergey, Paul? Thank you.
All right.
I don't know if it's so early in the morning or what, but it feels like the sun is like a mile away. Just a hair.
Well, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for allowing us to present to you kind of the next steps of the study process. As Kevin mentioned, my name is Sergey with FCS, and I also do have Paul joining me just in case we have any specific discussion that the board might want to take a look at. So as Kevin mentioned, today's presentation is really brief. We're trying to respond to the request for the edits of the scenarios that we presented in February. So we brought back some additional options for your considerations and really need to provide receive some guidance from the board in terms of at least kind of which scenario seems to be the most applicable in order for us to bring forward the next steps, the cost of service, and then the rate design to follow. So our really overview is going to be a quick refresher of what we have done to date, and then strictly focusing on the results of the scenarios. So again, very high level, we started the study update for this time around 2023, end of 23, we focused on the pole attachments first and presented those findings early last year. Since that time, we've been working to develop this update and presented some preliminary touch points to the board in November, focusing on the electric utility, the high level revenue requirements and scenarios, as well as the Clean Energy Transformation Act impacts on to support low-income customers. We followed up that presentation with additional scenarios, taking into account cost projections and revenue projections for capacity charges that were implemented between the touch points and presented those in February. At which point the board requested for several additional alternatives, and we are here today to present those. To remind ourselves in terms of what options we talked about back in February, we have split the scenarios into what we're calling original scenarios, the board requested scenarios, and then we actually brought back one more on top of that for your consideration. We'll talk about why we developed the fourth option since the last meeting. The first two original scenarios really focused on financing the capital plan that was identified for this time around. Option one looked at funding everything as is based on the scheduling and timing identified by the planning department and your staff. The second option looked at what if we can try to defer some of our pretty critical projects like the substation, the headquarter projects, because they are the ones that have the biggest value in the next couple of years. What if we deferred them about a year each, pushing it out the projects from 26 and 27? During our discussion in February, there's a couple of points that we wanted to look at and see if they would have an impact on our rate strategies. The first one really was related to the borrowing assumptions. We wanted to look at what if we extended the term of the borrowing to 30 years instead of 20 years. So scenario one really was reran using a 30-year term assumption, no changes in capital whatsoever, just strictly focusing on the borrowing term assumptions. We did the same thing for scenario two. And then the third scenario looked at trying to smooth the rate strategy as much as we can over the 4-year horizon, instead of having a slightly higher front-end increase to catch up with our reserves and everything else as we were presenting, and trying to keep those as smooth as possible. Now, since the February meeting, I believe the PD had a couple of weather events and an outage, which really amplified the importance of financing some of these improvements, and especially focusing on the substation. So we wanted to look at one additional scenario, which would not defer the projects, would utilize the 30-year bond term and model a 2-year interest-only payment based on our discussion with your staff and your current preferred lender through RUS. The typical bond loan through them assumes a 2-year interest-only payment in any case for all your payments. So this option would be in line with RUS borrowing and the terms that they have historically have provided to the PUD. So the first two options are what you've seen before. The next 4 options are the new ones that we'll be evaluating. So on this slide, just wanted to remind you of what we talked about. These are strictly the original scenarios, and I'll quickly go over what's included in the table. I do realize there's a lot of numbers here, so hopefully everything will flow through and make sense. Each scenario will have the annual proposed increase in order to fund the capital program and associated operating, maintenance, and power expenses. So this will capture all the 4-year planning obligations. Highlighted in yellow. After that, we're showing the annual capital plan, as well as the total for the 4 years, and the assumed borrowing that would be needed for the entire period, as well as year-specific borrowing. So in scenario one, we're looking at to fund $74 million of projects to the year, inflated to the year of construction, and we're anticipating we would need to borrow close to $38 million in 2026 in order to accomplish this plan. Next, we're showing you our projected combined ending balances. So we're combining our operating and capital or ending reserves into this line item and showing you what the projections are. And then as well as the $5 million line of credit that's available to all the utilities, $5 million in total that could be used to meet the ending balance target. Now you'll notice if we don't take into account the combined the line of credit for our balances, some of the years do get pretty low. Even with the line of credit usage, we're still below our combined target. The reason why we're trying to do that is that, again, we're trying to really walk that tightrope of balancing the impacts to our customers while at the same time meeting all the obligations that we have identified. So you'll notice the red highlights, those are the years that we're not quite meeting the combined target. And even towards the end of the period for scenario 1, as you saw last time, we get really close. Because it's 4 years out, it is because we're so close, we were comfortable with that scenario because the PUD does revisit rates on a frequent basis. So that's scenario 1 and the outline. I'll just focus on the results for the remaining scenarios. Scenario two, we showed you the deferral of some of those critical substation projects that would allow us to issue the debt a year later. The only difference is that now, because we're pushing projects out into the future and they're pretty substantial, inflation compounds the cost. So we're projecting the capital to go up from 73.7 million to 75.3 million due to that 1 year of inflation for each deferral. And then the borrowing would also have to scale from 37.8 to $39 million. Here, the reserves have similar issues, just shaped a little bit differently. And by deferring these projects, we're forecasting that we're able to reduce the back end adjustments down to 5 3/4 instead of keeping them higher at 11.5 for 3 years. Now the front end is still a little bit higher because we are projected to end the year so low on the reserve perspective. So the 11.5 is kind of there necessary to do some level of catch up on the front end. So these are already been presented. Now I'm going to switch gears and show you a slide with the new scenarios. And I'll go through each one individually. So scenario 1 looks at funding the entire capital plan without making any adjustments to the schedule and simply extending the terms. This allows us to save about 0.5% per year. So instead of having 11.5 for 3 years in a row, we would have 11% every year. The projected ending balances come up a little bit more and are a little bit more favorable. But in general, the big message here is that extending the term in the short term allows us to reduce the front end increases by about 0.5% per year. We see the same impact to scenario 2, which defers the projects. So now instead of having 11.5 followed by 5 3/4, we're able to reduce that to 11 and 5 1/4 per year thereafter. The level of debt assumed is still the same at $39 million for this option, and the total capital did not change. Scenario 3, trying to smooth out these rate increases at 7 3/4%. We're able to accomplish this, again, keeping the same assumptions of deferring the projects a year, borrowing $39 million. The only caveat is if you look at the combined ending balances, we do get pretty low without the line of credit, down to pretty much $1 million in 2026. So if we are comfortable with that level of reserves for the next 2 years or so, this would be the option alternative. But again, the first 2 years are going to be very tight if we're on schedule with all the costs, and there's no additional cost overrun. So really puts the pressure on meeting our projections. And then lastly, scenario 4 looks at, well, what if we keep the schedule? We know we've been having some issues at the substations that we currently have. Some of the weather that we've had, the storms that we had, have put a lot of pressure on our equipment. So if we keep with the same schedule and push out the principal repayment 2 years, this would allow us to keep the front end at 11%, drop down the 11s down to 7 3/4 for 2 years, and then closer to 5% in the back end of the projection. Again, the reserves will still have similar constraints, but slightly higher than the low of $1 million. And then lastly, just so you can see them all side by side, and I'll pause after this slide. Just wanted to provide you with all scenarios together. The first two are the original scenarios. We're showing you the percentage annual increase that would be necessary to meet the needs of these options, as well as a typical residential bill for a customer using 1,000 kWh per month, and what that would mean with this level of an increase to their average impact. Again, this is an average. Some will be lower, some will be higher, and it will also depend on the month that we're looking at. And then we have scenarios 1 through 4 at the bottom with the updated options. So I'll take a pause here. Any questions, discussions that you'd like to have?
As Commissioner Tupper, first question is, and this may be more staff oriented, the assumption of a 30-year bond. What's the odds that we can do 30-year? Because otherwise we're borrowing money on a 20-year contract likely, correct?
It could be anywhere from 20 to 30 years. It's going to depend on the thing, what we're borrowing to build. They base it on the useful life of the assets that are being done.
Because if we make a decision on one of these, but we can't get to 30-year, that's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean that.
And I don't know what it takes us to get the paperwork and do it and all that to get to a contract for a 30-year. What's that put? Is that a year out, 2 years out, 6 months? And where are we at?
I can't say for sure. I mean, we're probably a year, 2 years out. I mean, it's taken us a while for some of the other RUS loans that we've gotten. They do take time, just partially because we're unique on, we have to do it because it has to then become a revenue bond and not just a straight loan.
So, and part of this we'll cover in the next slide or the next presentation. We almost can't, not almost, we can't wait 2 years to figure out financing. Financing has to be a part of the big picture, but financing has to happen in 2025, period.
So what's the likely interest rate on a 30-year loan from RUS?
Last I had heard, it was around, I think our auditors, when they were here at the end of January, I think it was around 4.5%. Do you remember, Kevin?
Right at 4.
I think, yeah, between the 4.5% at that time. That was at the end of January. I can reach out to Rodney Peach, who is our GFR, our field rep for RUS, and kind of get an idea. I didn't before today's meeting, but we can reach out and kind of see what the interest rate would be and bring that back to the board.
And I guess another question would be if you could ask Rodney, is there any reason not to believe that the kind of infrastructure improvements are proposing to fund would not qualify for a 30-year loan? Do they have any concerns that it would be some shorter term than that? I think that would be good to find out.
So that's one of the components that I'm looking at. The second one is, and Sergey mentioned it, we've already been, knocked up alongside the head a couple times here that we're behind on our infrastructure. Deference to me isn't an option. We have to get the stuff ordered, figure out what we need, get it ordered, and have the money up front. So deferring this in any way, shape, or form past the first 2 years to me doesn't make any sense.
And that's kind of a question I have. When we say deferment, I mean, I guess I'm thinking about it. If we said full speed ahead on all this stuff, it just seems like there's supply chain issues, there's design time and land acquisition issues. Even under these deferment, quote, deferment scenarios, I'm kind of wondering if we'd be able to go faster than that anyway, just how long these things take to develop.
The goal is to move as quickly as possible, but you're right. We're going to have to set some priorities, and the substation transformer is 2 years out.
Yeah.
If we purchased it tomorrow, that would not happen for 2 years.
And does the money exchange at that point when we order it, or is it part of it,
Probably
like a
part.
deposit or something?
Yes, it's set up so you pay so much as a complete pieces of the transformer.
Because I have the same concerns Dan does. I mean, we're seeing stresses on the system. I think some of the questions we're going to have for Sergey about time of use rates and how might things like that be sending signals to our customers so that we see maybe a little bit less stress on our system in times of high use. Could we shave those peaks a little bit with time of use rates? But I think, we say in here deferment, but I think in reality, it would be really nice to know, okay, the fastest we could really possibly go would be this. And are we really talking about deferment or not? Or what are, because I have the concerns that Dan does, but I kind of wonder, could we even really go that, like if we said go now, what does that even mean? When
Still going to be a lag.
When would the money flow? What is the actual project flow, and which scenarios does that leave open to us?
And again, around the region, we're seeing a lot of other utilities who are looking at, expanding their infrastructure, regardless of whose money's out there, whether it's, grant money or grant loan or loans, there's going to be a lot of competition within the industry for the equipment. The longer we wait, the further back it pushes us. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And the other utilities, arguably may or may not have the money, but they have access to money that probably we're a little more constrained because of our situation that we're in here, being fairly new to the industry and the debt we have, and et cetera, et cetera. So again, this is the argument for why not to defer.
Yeah. And I think the RUS loan process, we've seen that can be rather lengthy, and who knows if that's going to be affected by, hopefully it's not affected by anything that's happening in DC right now, but that doesn't seem to happen more quickly than estimated. It seems to take longer than estimated. So
The loan portion of this has to be as expedited as the transformer,
mhm.
whether it's RUS, a bond, conventional loans, CFC, CoBank.
And we're not borrowing it all in the first year, so we could maybe do a 20-year to get us moving, and then everything else after be 30 years. So
There'll be a
There
lot
are
of-
options on,
Yeah.
there's options on how we borrow it, when we borrow it, where we borrow it from. There are those options that we haven't looked at because we don't know for sure.
like I said,
Trying to-
I'm not
There.
big on debt, not big on paying interest, but 30 years at this point for what we got to do in front of us is arguably the route we should go.
Talking about $67 million.
Yeah. Like I said, 30 years would be better than 20, but
Right.
we may have to, take a little bit of a hit up front. So two more parts about this on the previous slide, I guess it was. Again, my reasons for making the case that I'm making here, and it's not a pretty one. I've said all along, there's pain coming, and here it is. It's right, staring us right in the face. And that is the line of credit being utilized as part of this equation. I don't think it should be used in any way, shape, or form because it is there as part of our risk management policy and financial policy as part of our 90 days operating. And if we're going to start using it for capital money as well and other things, then that just puts us that much worse off in how much reserve we should be carrying in cash. And again, that's the fourth leg of what my argument is. What do our reserves going to look like? We need some influx into our reserve to keep it where it needs to be. We're at 14 million, no, is it 13 million now, I think. It's kind of where we're at. To stay on 90 days, we could be at 16, 17 million here before very long of what our reserves should be according to our policies. So
If I'm understanding the data correctly, we're not looking at spending that $5 million line of credit. It is there to back up our reserves. So it's included in the reserves, but it's not, there's no plan to draw on it for any of the construction.
okay,
Correct.
I guess I missed.
Yeah. Could you
I
explain?
guess
it?
I'm misreading.
I'm confused too, because sometimes I see a $5,000 line of
5
credit.
million.
But thank you. 5 million line of credit in a scenario. Sometimes it's there twice. Sometimes it's there 3 times. Can somebody explain what that means?
I'm gonna let
Yeah, sure, not a problem. Sorry for the confusion. So let's take scenario 1 as an example. The combined ending fund balance row shows the true cash that we're projecting you're going to have. Now you're going to have fluctuations throughout the year, but for modeling purposes, we don't model monthly. For cash purposes, we could try, but there's so much variability month to month. So we're projecting year-end balances. So in scenario 1, we're projecting that assuming we can mobilize the capital and do the planned construction in 25 that we have included in the study, we would end the year for operating and capital at about $2.1 million. Now our combined target for operating capital, which is 90 days for operations and a 5-year average CIP for capital, is $16.6 million. So we're trying to make sure, the question is, do we have enough cash to meet 16 million? The answer is no, we're only at 2. So then we say, okay, since we're not meeting our combined target, we're allowed to use a 5 million line of credit to hopefully try to meet that target. So that's why we're adding 5 million this year. And we're saying with the line of credit, we would end the year at 7 million, still below our target. Now, if we want to look at only the operating target alone is about 8 million to $9 million, depending on the year we're projecting. So in this case, we're not even quite meeting the 90 days in this year of 2025. Year two, because we're borrowing money and we're generating cash flow, we can save some of that cash flow to help us meet our operating target. So we're projecting to end this year just pure cash because of the new loan proceeds at 19 million, and our target that year is 17. So we don't even need to use a line of credit during the year that where we infuse our balances with loan proceeds before we actually spend them all. The following year, because we spend all our proceeds from cash and we haven't been building up our reserves enough with this rate strategy, we're getting to about 3.7 million of actual cash, which is below our projected target of 15.7 million, 15.8 million. So that's why you see the line of credit appear again, trying to help us reach that target. But even with that 5 million line of credit, we're not able to reach the 15 million combined target. And our 27 operating 90-day target is projected to be 9.6 million. So even in this case, in 27, we're not quite projecting to meet our 9.6 million 90-day target, even with the use of line of credit. So really what we're looking at here is how much cash we have, and in the years that we need to use using the line of credit just to try to meet the balances. We're not proposing to use the line of credit to actually pay for projects.
Okay, can I offer some suggestions? Because
Yeah.
I am presuming this table is going to come back in some. So the couple of these lines to me are confusing if you just look at it. So like where it says line of credit, I don't know if it would be good to say like in parentheses available but not used or something. Line of credit available, and then total fund balances. Maybe you could have in parentheses with line of credit included. And then the final one, combined target, maybe that could say something like combined 90-day reserve target. Just so we understand what you're, because I think anybody looking at this would be confused, and I was confused.
Okay.
Plus, not plus capital, but plus our normal, like $5-6 million work.
I don't know, just something that's saying it's a target. It's really the 90-day reserve target is what we're talking about. Not actually what we have, but it's what we would like to have. I don't know.
But even under this case, if we access, let's just go year one, 2025, we access 2 million in line of credit for whatever catastrophe. What does that do? How does that skew it? Where does the money come from now to pay off the 2 million that we've taken from the line of credit? Because now that's not there as part of our reserve.
I think you're getting confused because
I
combined,
guess.
so the combined ending fund balance is exactly what it is. So where it says combined ending fund balance, that's what they're projecting we would be at the end of the year, not including, none of these scenarios include pulling anything out of the line of credit. The combined ending fund balance is exactly that. So the numbers below that are the ones that confuse me, and I think they're confusing you too. So.
Yeah, obviously.
Okay. So the thing I see that's changing here with these different scenarios is how much ending fund balance we have, basically. And you're showing the line of credits there to be used if we need it. But I'm relieved in some ways that none of these scenarios are using them. So the main difference is in some scenarios, you've got 37.8 million being borrowed. In some scenarios, you've got 39 billion being borrowed, what year it is. And then from the commissioners, you're giving us options on percentage of rate increases and what that's expected to do with the bill. So I guess that would be a good discussion for us to have, which one of these directions, if percentage of rate increases matter to us, would we prefer? And then I think we're going to need more information on if we wanted to go as fast as we could, what would that mean? And would it actually mean deferment in reality or not? And I guess if we decide to borrow the money and you've got one scenario, you got the scenarios where we're borrowing the money in 2026 versus borrowing the 8 million, 9 million in 2027. If we applied today with RUS, could we even get the 38 million or whoever, in that time frame? And what would that mean? So I think it'd be nice to know really those two differences, what you're outlining. Okay, if we borrowed the money in 2026, how fast could we go? If we borrowed the money in 2027, how fast would we go?
Well,
Does that make sense to
Yeah.
the other commissioners?
we're borrowing the money based on the construction work plan.
Right,
So it's not 60 million the first year.
right.
So, we can work this up. And I tend not to do this, but I'm gonna try. I think we need the 11% in 2025. And then could we eliminate a couple of the scenarios to make it easier for Sergey and Paul to come to the next meeting and give us a better presentation? Can we go like 2 and 4? I like the 4. It kind of spreads it out a little bit, but can you guys narrow us down a little bit on a couple scenarios to make it so they run the next meeting a little easier? They don't have to run 10 scenarios or.
So when I look at those two differences, so like we've got the 11% ones, which leave us with a fund balance of 2 million. And then you've got the 7.75% that leaves us with a fund balance of 1.5 million roughly. But I'm assuming that this isn't showing how much money, that there's a difference in how much money you would spend.
Yep.
Could you talk about that a little bit? Because I don't see that shown anywhere.
So in year one, we're talking about, is that what you're asking?
Exactly. 'Cause
Yeah,
that's-
in year one, I believe, we are planning to spend the same amount. So if we go back to the original scenario, see, the issue with us trying to show everything on one slide, because sometimes it's easier to see, and I think for the next version, we might focus on each scenario individually and then only bring in the percentages, is that there just becomes too many numbers. So if we go back to slide 5, here we're showing the timing of capital, which is the only thing that's changing between scenarios. So if you look at 25, we're still anticipating the same spend in 25 for all the scenarios. The only difference for the deferments start happening in 26 and 27. So if we look, and I'm going to see if I can use my marker here. If you look at the capital that I'm highlighting right now for 26, the change in the deferment option drops to 28 million and 26 to 8 million. And then it pushes it out into the future 2 years. So then 27 is originally 28 million. It actually bumps up a little bit to 30. And we push out the last year from 4 million, now becomes 23. So it's just a 1 year shift for all the bigger projects. So that's the main difference. But 2025 does not change in timing. So in timing of the spend.
Okay, so you're saying the capital improvements are the same for whether you defer or don't defer the year one, you just end up, okay. Well, the problem with that slide though, Sergey, is you've got the same percentage rate increase in year one. And what I'm trying to get at is what happens with a lower rate increase in year one, like the 7.75 to capital
What's the
deferment.
totals of what they want to do by year.
Okay. 12 million.
So sorry, did you want me, which slide would you like me to be? The new?
Well, so you're saying under all the scenarios, the capital improvements in year one is the same.
Yes.
Okay. So then under the 7.75, we end up with the ending fund balance of roughly 1.5 million. And then in year two, under that scenario, this is scenario 3, we're down to 1 million, but we haven't borrowed the money yet. I guess what would be the problem with borrowing the money in 2026 under scenario 3? What happens?
Scenario 3. So it'll depend if we assume the payment is in full instead of interest only. Now cash flow that was we're basically trying to build up our cash flow as well to when we're pushing out the borrowing into 2027. So under scenario 3, by moving the debt issuance 1 year, we're giving ourselves, 3 years of 7.75 compounded together to build up our rates high enough to support a debt service for this level. If we if we reduce the front end increases but borrow ahead and we still have to make the first payment in 26, this is where we get into that fine tuning of when the interest is due and when its principal is due. Now, because we didn't raise our rates high enough on the front end, our rates are not going to be substantial enough to cover our obligations. Our cash flow drops down, and our ending balances most likely might not be able to be met. So the 1 million would go down if all we did is borrowed earlier and assumed the payments are due earlier. So it does have an impact on the timing of when we borrow and the level of the increases that we have.
Okay.
Dan, we're obviously talking about money here over a 4-year period. But what concerns me is the utility overall, the rates that we're going to set for everything. This is just on the capital side of it, is we're looking at this year potentially a BPA surcharge because it's a low water year. And so our cost of power could go up this year, conceivably at the end of the year. And then we're looking at a 3-year rate case of a 3% increase every year for the next 3 years, 26, 27, and 28. So I'm concerned about our cost of power, and trying to meld those rates in with what we're doing on the capital side that I just don't see deferring in any way at this point. It gets to be too risky.
Sure. And I'm still trying to understand what deferment means. So what I've heard is there is no deferment in year 1. So when does the deferment happen and what is the amount?
It depends on. I want to say, if I remember right, in the first scenario, Sergey deferred a couple of substation projects. It was $12-15 million where we moved over to the next one. It wasn't deferred absolutely everything. It was just a partial deferment.
Okay.
Right. And I think, Paul, you popped on, you have the numbers that we have and the substations that we were anticipating to defer. So do you have that information?
Yeah, so in deferred scenarios, we would defer all substation projects in 26 to 27. We would defer all headquarter projects from 26 to 27. That totals about $20 million. So shifting 20 million from 26 to 27. And then when we look at the 27 projects that are currently scheduled, we would shift all 27 substation projects and all 27 headquarter projects to 28, which is another about 19 million. So shifting about 19 million from 27 to 28.
So basically those are kind of 2-year phased. It takes 2 years to complete them. And I guess the headquarters project, to me, they fall into 2 different categories because the substation projects relate to our ability to provide electricity reliably. The headquarters does not. So I don't know why we would be pushing headquarters up in a time when we're struggling for cash. To me, that's the one we would push
the
back.
Flexibility you'll have with.
We wouldn't do it.
Yeah. So that wouldn't be up there anyway. And again, I just don't like double-digit rate increases unless there's truly an emergency. And the rate increases we're hearing from Bonneville are significant. The costs of materials going up is significant. But to me, I don't know if it's so much that I feel comfortable with the double-digit rate increase. Ken?
So my past preference would have been to smooth out the rate increases as in the third scenario, but I'm looking at the difference in our reserves, and that makes me uncomfortable. So I think we have a consensus that we do not defer the capital improvements because it takes too long to order the equipment and it just pushes it out and it makes us vulnerable in terms of failure of the system. And we have people whose lives depend on electricity being there. So it strikes me that the fourth scenario, which does not defer anything except the payment on the principal borrowing, makes the most sense to me. And that's the one that doesn't really take us below a $2 million balance, plus the line of credit. So I think it's a matter of biting the bullet and accepting the higher year one increase, and being able to push forward as quickly as we can on the capital improvements that are needed.
And this doesn't, the capital plan doesn't include some projects like the power inline 4 or 5 megawatt. Doesn't include that, and it doesn't include that underwater cable to Indian Island and Marrowstone, right?
Does not include that.
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Those, and we'll talk about that in a pinch. Those are on our 10-year work plan, not our 4-year. This is
Mhm.
what we need to do in the 4-year.
And that's more of
short
a,
term.
more of a want than a need, except for the substation portion of it.
A lot of this.
I think it is a need still, yeah.
But I'm getting at is there's a lot of other needs in front of
It's
it.
not critical
Yeah,
need as critical as these are.
It's an inconvenience.
It'd make the system more reliable. And, well, I think for conversational purposes and to advance this, is the commission okay with proceeding with giving direction to proceed with further work on scenario 4?
I'd still like to keep one on the table as well. I know it's not pretty, but I'm just concerned about our overall cost as a utility in this 4-year period, let alone the 10-year, because we're going to sign the contracts. We know tier 2 power is going up. Our cost of power is going to impact us a lot more, I think, than people realize. So it just concerns me because that's money that will be taken away from us that would go to capital.
As we know, we're not casting anything in concrete. And if we're faced with significantly higher costs related to BPA, we may have to go back and adjust this. If we went, for instance, with scenario 4. But I hear what you're saying, and I think we have to be flexible on it, because if our costs go up, the rates have to follow.
So I have a question for staff and for Sergey. Do we need to pick one option, or as Dan's requesting, can we pick 2 to have an alternative to continue to consider? Or what does staff and FCS really need here from us?
So, oh, go ahead, Kevin.
If we go 2 scenarios, they have to run basically all the numbers twice.
Yeah.
So the least work we can give FCS is what staff's requiring. But if you want to see 2, it would slow us down a little bit, but not a lot.
Well, as we go forward, it would still be nice to have 2 as a comparable, so we don't just get locked in on that one and then have to come all the way back and look at all this again. If we have another one working in parallel, we're picking what we figured to be the best option for a compromise. If that one works out not to be workable, we're going to need something more than that. And so it makes sense to me to still have the original, no capital deferment, 30-year bond, 20-year loan, whatever, working along with that to compare it to, here's the worst case scenario. Here's the one we think we can make work. If we just go with the one we think we can make work, then we could get lulled into this sense of we can make it work out. And maybe at the end of the day, we come to the conclusion that it isn't going to work out.
And again, these would be rates that would change in June. That's the goal.
Yes.
Okay. Well, Ken, are you okay with that? Having
Yes.
2 options
Yeah,
continue?
no, I have no problem. with
So I
that.
guess we'd like to see option 1 and 4 further played out. Please try and make the language on the left as clear as possible, so we know and the public knows what those numbers really mean. And then, and I guess we're not picking a deferred option.
Mhm.
So I guess it would, if we could have it, you've kind of got it detailed out here a little bit. I guess if we could, maybe this is it. Maybe you just provide this to us in the, or was this in the engineering study?
Yep.
Okay, I didn't get that far. Maybe in similar to this, or could just be a slide that kind of shows, okay, the capital improvements are these. These are what we're talking about and how the money would flow over time.
Okay.
All right. Anything else on these, Ken?
Yes. I think we need to, and maybe it's a change to our billing, so that people understand the money that is going out for capital improvement. We've talked about this at various times of identifying in customer bills the amount of money going for capital improvement. But as I look at it, if we went with scenario 1, you're talking about a 36% increase in rates over a 4-year period of time. Scenario 4 is 31.5% over the same period of time. I just had a conversation with the customer this morning before our meeting, who was calling to my attention the difficulty that people have paying for the services that we provide. And I think we have really a yeoman's task of explaining to people why their rates are going to go up by a third over a short period of time. That's gonna have a bite. And I'm assuming, Sergey, that you're factoring in that as we raise our rates, that there has to be some sort of corresponding offset for our low-income customers.
That's correct. We're keeping the current proportionalities consistent. So if there's a change, an increase, the proportionality will change, but we'll discuss that internally before we present a final recommendation. Now, one item that I want to make sure everybody keeps in the back of their mind for the next presentation is that if we go back to kind of the concept of rate setting, step 1, which is what we're focusing on right now, defines the overall system-wide increase. Cost of service, which we spent quite a bit of time during the original study back in 2020-21, talks about, let's look at inter-class cost allocation. So now we will bring back an alternative showing you how this weighted average increase has to be spread between classes in order to achieve their appropriate cost allocation or inter-class equity. And as a quick reminder, last time we did identify that there were differences, but we chose to do a very gradual increase to correct those differences. So meaning some classes went up slightly more than average, and some classes went up slightly less than average, trying to get them towards cost of service. So the reason why I want to say that is that when you're seeing 11%, it might mean 11.25 for somebody, and it might mean 10.75 for somebody else, if we are trying to make some semblance of progress. And the
Right.
quantity of the increase above or below the average will dictate based on the policy discussion we'll have with you when we show you the numbers.
Okay.
Okay, so we will focus on scenario 1 and 4. The positive end of that is that the first year is the same, so we can the first year discussion can be identical. The difference comes in when we get into the phase-in alternatives. That's where the phase-ins will differ by scenario, and then the rate designs. If we get into the phase-ins by year, that's where the difference will come in as well.
And Sergey, you're talking about S1 in the updated scenarios, right? Not the original 11.5. You're talking about the 11% over 3 years.
Right, so also please do let me know if you're looking at the original 11.5, because this one was with 20-year bonds or loans versus the updated S1 is with 30. So if you
Yeah.
want to see the 11.5, we can
I'm okay with working on the 30-year assumption to start with. Like I said, this is just trying to keep worst
Okay.
case scenario. It could get even worse than the worst case scenario on the updateds. So
Okay, so just confirming with everybody, we're going by the new S1 and the new S4. Is that right? Did I hear that right?
because that's kind of apples to apples with the overall increase. It's what, 36% on one and 32% on the other, I think, by going with those over the course of the 4 years.
Right, without compounding accounted for.
Hey, this is Joel. I had a quick question for Sergey, if that's okay. My question is, what if we were super efficient and really fortunate to bring that $37.8 million in 2025? Is that a material difference?
So that becomes a little bit tricky because we would have to really fine tune the terms of the payment, right? Because right now we're projecting for that loan, the new payment would be without interest, without principal. We're estimating interest only at 1.8 million and with principal about 2.6 million. So we're basically giving ourselves a year or two to ramp up the rates enough to start paying that extra 1.8 to 3 million. Now, if we say we got the loan in 25, mid-year, if we're having to make a partial payment to the loan in 25, that could put a little bit more pressure on our beginning balances. So we definitely would have to fine tune and hone in on the assumptions behind the borrowing. If the borrowing repayment wouldn't start completely zero repayment until 26 or 27, then it'll be great. It'll look positive. But if we have to make any kind of payments towards interest or principal, it could add additional pressure in the front end. That's why getting money is great, but the timing of when we get the money and the loan repayment terms are also important to keep in mind, because if our rates might not be ready to handle that amount of new obligations.
And so are you assuming in 2026 with the loan, is that January 1st or July 1st, or the payments are quarterly, or what?
So for our initial scenarios, because as we talk about, we can make infinite amount of scenarios. We're assuming the full payment will be due year one. So so it's the entire payment. We could model assuming mid-year where we're only
Okay.
paying half an interest,
Got it.
but that's where it becomes so granular that we can bring you back 100 options and it'll just be too much.
I guess I'm wondering if it would make sense to talk to RUS and any other financiers who are seriously looking at this as to what those options are. When you borrow the money, the cash is available this year, and here are your options on when those payments have to
Yes,
start.
Part of that in the next portion.
Now that we're zoomed in on 30-year terms, what are the different vehicles? Because I remember when we got our first RUS loan, it was the payments were deferred for a couple of years. So what are the options?
I've got a question.
Go ahead, Ken.
I'm a bit confused with Sergey, what you said a few minutes ago. Not that I haven't been confused all along, but we would not pay interest on money that we haven't yet borrowed. So I'm assuming that you're assuming that we stick to the projections as to what we would spend in year one, and we wouldn't be responsible for repaying either principal or paying interest, except on the money that we've actually spent, that we've actually borrowed.
So I think just to make sure we're on the same page, I think I was answering the question Joel asked, if we received financing, if we borrowed the money somehow miraculously in 25, if we found a lender that would give us the money now, tomorrow, or in middle of 25 by June, I was referring to making a payment potentially in 25. Now, again, depending on the borrowing lending mechanism, you might not have to pay any interest. You might capitalize the interest and roll it into the loan. There's mechanisms that allow you to do that as well. There's different financing mechanisms. So for the scenarios where we're assuming that we're borrowing the loan in 26, I'm assuming that we're making the payment in 26. This does assume that you're going to get it early on. For the scenarios where scenario 4, where we do interest only, again, we're showing the borrowing in 26. We're assuming in this year you get the money and you borrow that money and you make the payment of interest only in that year. In reality, you know, again, if we talk to RUS and they say it's based on the draws, we would have to line up the draws a little bit more accurately. But that right now, the way the capital plan is structured, there's a certain amount of money spent in 26 and 27. So we can get a lot more granular, I guess, or attempt to, but we would need more guidance in terms of exactly when the projects are going to be spent, exactly what month the money is going to be spent, and that I don't know if we have that level of information available.
Well, I
Does
guess
that-
we've already eliminated the defer option. So I guess with the direction we're giving staff, asking staff to do a little more work to think about when would the projects likely start? When could the financing be obtained? What are the options on the financing repayments so that we can, because I mean, when we're getting down to like $2 million in the balance, we are getting granular and we're going to, you know, whether it's quarterly or the first half of the year or whatever, I think we have to be as accurate as we can be. And as we're eliminating the deferment option, hopefully, and some of these rate increase options, hopefully you can do that working with our staff. Okay. Does Sergey have more to go through?
No, I think that's it. That's really the end of the presentation.
All right.
What we were looking for is that guidance about the scenarios, and our goal is to work on the cost of service, a discussion, and then the rate design after that.
Okay. I just want to bring to Sergey's attention, we've had 2 items that have been discussed regarding this rate increase. One has been time of use rates. And Sergey, could you just share with the board what work you have done or where you are prepared to discuss with us in the future time of use rates? Just give us a little intro.
So the time use rates that will be prepared for, and we're working through it with staff, basically look at charging energy depending on the time of day. So if we have higher costs that are occurring during peak time periods that we're incurring, we could have an incentive-based rate that is higher during that time period, incentivizing our customers to shift their load during different time of the day. Now, we're still working out the details with staff in terms of the time periods. Do we want to line those up with Bonneville, what their definitions of heavy load, light load hours are? Do we want to create our own time of use definitions? Some utilities even develop moderate time of use, so you don't have to have light load, heavy load. You can have different ranges. It creates a lot of alternatives. So we're still developing those options, and we're still procuring the data necessary to develop those from your meters as well.
Okay. And is it possible that we could have 2 different ones if like the summer loads happen differently than the winter loads, that we could have like a winter time of use rate and a summer time of use rate? Or I guess what would be the most helpful in affecting customer behavior to help us out?
So from mechanical perspective, as in from a development rate design perspective, we can be daily technically, we can change them anytime we want if there's data to support it and if your administrative practices support it. But really what we need to think about is when is the utility incurring the most costs, and then when are we feeling at a pinch? So if the winter load peak time period is our main issue, our substations are constrained at that time, or our power supply costs are the highest at that time, we could just target winter time period and have time of use during the winter time, and then have uniform rates in the summertime. We can have different periods or different seasonal rates with time of use embedded in them. So there are different ways and alternatives. And I typically would say we need to evaluate what is our constrained period, what are we trying to accomplish, and then target that period instead of necessarily just having an option that's just generic as well. for them,
Okay, and
especially.
hopefully it's something that will resonate with people so they can remember it too. You know, it's significant and they know what it is. So, okay. I guess the other issue that's come up is we had a customer come to us who actually has he's got 3 meters on a residence. So he's paying 3 monthly base fees. And we don't need the answer now, but we've tasked staff with, hey, let's look into this. Could we change this for people who have multiple meters, and gave them some options. And we found that we had something like 2,000 meters or 2,000 customers with multiple meters. So I think one of the questions, at least I'm going to have, is when we talk about a base fee for a residence, what does that mean? And what are the assumptions? Because if I've got a house and a garage and I've got 2 meters and I'm paying 2 meter base fees, my presumption was always that, well, that's really kind of referring to one residence. But that'll be a difficult discussion, but just kind of want to prepare you for that a little
Yeah.
bit.
And I can offer some context if you like right now, because there's different policy directions folks have taken, but or we can save it for later. I want to be respectful of your time as well.
I think we can save it for later.
Okay, we will save it for later, but that's just to give you a heads up.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you for letting me know.
Thanks, Sergey. Glad you're healthy enough to be with us again.
Oh, I appreciate it. I still got drainage from a month ago. I don't know. It's just, I hit that
Bad winter.
milestone. It is one of those years. I tell you what.
I feel your pain. I was sick for about 2.5 months. So,
So even though it's a special meeting, you going to entertain any questions from the public?
well, do we have anybody online? We have one hand up there. So let's hang on, Sergey, before you go.
Okay.
Is that Roger? Go ahead, Roger.
Thank you. Regarding what Sergey just said about time of use rates, are we intending to make them revenue neutral, or apropos to the rest of the discussion, is this going to be another source of revenue that we haven't considered?
I can. Well, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Sergey.
So the intent when we develop rate structures is the reason why we go through sequential steps of revenue requirement, cost of service, is that they identify a revenue target, and the rate design will target the revenue identified in those first 2 steps. So our intent is to make sure from a class specific level that any rate design we present to you will be revenue neutral.
So it
Thank
sounds like
you.
if there's increases at certain times of heavy use, there would be decreases of energy costs at lower times of use. Would that be correct?
That's correct. So the less constrained time period will be cheaper on the per kilowatt hour basis. The more constrained time period will be more expensive.
And the overall goal would be to collect the same amount of money, but to affect behavior. Okay.
Right.
Tom Tiersch, you're up.
Thank you. Yes, revenue neutrality is clearly the right thing to do. It's the only fair way to go. But what you were speaking of with respect to the time of year also matters, because our usage patterns are so radically different between summer and winter. I can't imagine not having at least 2 different time schedules for these time of use rates. A summer schedule and a winter schedule. And yes, it may be a little bit difficult for people to keep track of it, but if there's a sufficient financial incentive, people will keep track of it, and they'll program their usage for automatic things like you program your car to charge at a certain time of day, for example. You can simply change that schedule. And if it's a smart enough system, then you can almost automate a lot of that. So anyway, I'm looking forward to hearing those rates. There are a lot of good examples from all over the country of how various people have done it, various utilities have done it. So, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We just have to pick some that provide good models for us. So thanks for bringing it up. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom. Phil Stover, you're on if you're ready to go.
You're muted, Phil.
Okay, I got unmuted, sorry. I just want to understand what revenue neutral really means in the context of tiers for BPA. So my thought is that if TOU is effective, then actually the total cost of operating the electric utility goes down. Um, i- is that true? I mean, is that consistent with what we're saying here, or am I off base?
I think we're trying to mitigate impacts both to our operating system because we've been overstressing our system, as well as I think, yes, a secondary goal would be to mitigate the time we're exposed to tier 2 rates, but those are largely unknown. So when somebody's calculating rates, all they can do is make assumptions of what is known. So with their model, their goal is to say, okay, here, this should meet the revenue targets. And then when they tweak the time of use rates, they're tweaking them to have enough of an effect to create reduction in usage at those times. But then they're setting the rates to collect the same amount of money. So the point you're bringing up of trying to, trying to reduce your BPA rates, we're trying to reduce the stress to our system and exposure to tier 2. But I think, would it decrease what we're paying to BPA? Hard to know.
So
So I guess what you're saying is that 11% or whatever scenario we look at isn't going to go down if you put TOU in there. And I
Correct.
had the other assumption was that
No,
that
we'd
you
still be
might-
collecting the same amount of money. There'd still be that same rate increase. It's just how it's calculated per day, I think, is the goal.
yeah, if I may add, in the perfect world, if Bonneville charged us strictly on time of use rates themselves, you would see that correlation of if we shift our load to when they're charging us time at lower rates during light load period, then we'll see a cost savings and then a reduction. The way that Bonneville assesses rates to the utilities is fairly complicated. They have fixed charges, they have demand charges, they have adjustments, and a lot of their cost structure is fixed. So what we're trying to accomplish through time of use is that the demand portion of the bill, we're trying to reduce it down by shifting our load off peak time period and the constraint on our distribution system. So we're sizing and hitting peaks quite a bit. We're having to upsize infrastructure. Those costs we're not just going to see disappear over time instantly. The development of substation takes many years to develop. So just simply offloading our load today might not have that direct distribution load offset or capital investment load offset in year one. It would help over a prolonged period of time, but not just an instant from that perspective. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, so you're right, Phil. It's possible we could see some reduced demand charges, but I think we have to wait and see how that works.
Thank you.
Roger, did you have a part 2 to your question or comment?
Yeah, am I still on?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Yeah, I did. I wanted to know, if this is a serious situation, why don't we have all hands on deck here? Why are we just putting increases on the residents and not the commercial customers?
The rate increases will apply to all customers. So it's just,
I see.
as Sergey said, as we get into it, they do these calculations of residents, commercial, publics, that they're a little different for each one, but all the classes will be looking at some form of rate increases.
I see. That wasn't clear from the presentation.
Yeah, so when we get to the actual this is just a little touch base with the commissioner so that FCS could get enough direction so that they could do that work. When they do that work, we'll see all the rate classes.
And may I make a comment?
If you keep it short, go ahead.
Sure. I like the idea of borrowing to pay for infrastructure. As long as our rate increases exceed inflation, and at times when our loan interest rate is less than inflation, it seems, and that was very true so far through the loan that we already have, the big one at 2.35%. Anyway, it seems like that makes borrowing a good deal, and it's really easy to keep ahead of inflation with our rate increases. It seems like they always are, And that's almost like printing your own money. It makes the loans a lot cheaper. And the other thing I wanted to say was uncertain times. Hang on to your cash. Anyhow, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. Yeah, waiting on projects just makes them more expensive. That is all true. Okay, so where are we at on the agenda?
Thank you.
Or thanks, Sergey. Good job.
Sergey.
So
Thanks, Paul.
for your work plan,
For your work plan, I don't know if you want to take a break real quick or just jump right in.
are we okay to continue? Anybody need a break?
2-minute break.
2-minute break. Let's go. All right, we are back in session. So we are on the electrical system 4-year capital facilities and construction work plan. Kevin?
Okay, we're gonna get partway through this today, and then we'll probably bring it back next Tuesday. Maybe we'll start the board meeting at 3 so that we can finish up through this. And this is really, the intent is to have a conversation with the board and other.
And just to let you know, I can't do that. Starting the
So-
meeting at 3 next, I have a
We
doctor.
may throw it in at 4 and part of the meeting. That works.
Yeah,
We can get through this.
I've got a specialist appointment that I tried to move and I couldn't move it, so it took me a year to schedule.
This is our 4-year work plan. Next slide. We have our commissioners and part of what the commission has to do is to have a fiduciary and a obligation to our customers to make sure we have safe, reliable power. And a 4-year work plan that's adopted by the commission is really one of the easiest ways to make sure that we're doing right by our customers. Next slide. To begin with, before I talk about really what a 4-year work plan is and how we use it, I have some thank yous I have to send out. ICPE, they're our engineering firm. They've worked extremely hard on this. Mike Valari, Mike Lavorison, and Steve Nash, along with their staff, they spent a lot of time and energy working with us to get this put together. This presentation, Jameson on our staff and Eric Pryor has helped quite a bit. And then again, the BOC for working through all these issues. A 4-year work plan is a budgeting and planning tool to help guide the utility. We're talking about financing. You can't borrow money from RUS or any lender without a work plan. So what we're proposing here works whether it's an RUS, a CFC, a co-bank, going down to the normal bank here, the local bank. You need this plan to move forward. And it has to be a plan agreed upon between staff and the board. There were some questions on should we even put a 4-year work plan together with me leaving, because a lot of changes will happen when I leave. We put this plan together because there's a need. That need won't change. Who's ever in charge of the PUD at that time, the need will still be there. So this capital project is something that staff has to embrace and push, but it's also something the board has to embrace and say, okay, I need these things done. Hold staff accountable. The projects on this list, they were determined by how we operate the system today. Many of these projects that we're talking about have been in process for over 8 years. A specific example is Breaker Lane. the very first time we upgraded, Fort Ludlow substation, we had problems at Breaker Lane and had to go in and change settings. So these are determined by a lot of computer modeling, a lot of time spent with our staff and ICPE reviewing all of these projects. But also, a lot of them are driven by known problems that we've seen for a long time that have to be fixed. Next slide. Our SCADA and meter data is becoming more important every day. The meters we're using now give us 15-minute intervals, gives us a lot of information. And some of the things are just so important. For example, you're going to see some voltage problems down on some of our longer feeders. We can not only tell you about it, but we can show you with the meters that we're collecting every day, the voltage at the end of Marrowstone Island. And that leads us to a better understanding of what we have and better ways to fix things and additional ways to maybe move things around. So our SCADA system and our metering system are invaluable, not only for ICPE, but for our dispatchers and our line crews we work through.
So what's the impact on customers of a voltage drop?
So most of the time, a voltage drop doesn't affect the customer. What it does affect, if it gets too low, some of their, like a motor won't run as fast. Your water heater won't heat up as quickly, but it gets to a certain point where it will start damaging electronics and stuff like that. It's rare, but it can happen. And that's why a lot of these improvements that we're talking about will keep us out of that damage curve. Right now, we have low voltage, but it's really not affecting the customer equipment.
So Kevin, does the meters that we have at the north end of Marrowstone Island, are they literally telling us what the voltage is being delivered to a home, for example?
Yes. Throughout our system, the new metering system that we have, not only you can log into the meter and you can see instantaneous voltage, you can see usage, and all of that information is what Sergey uses to set rates, but it's also what ICP uses to do their studies and to decide what to do. Our dispatchers use it by rerouting power so that we can pick up, Marrowstone's not a good example, but we can move power around to maybe help voltage one way, feeding it out of a different substation.
Okay.
So valuable, very, very good to have that information.
Good.
Next slide. So in the packet, there was a 4-year work plan that was submitted to the commissioners and it's online. That document is broken down into substations, transmission, distribution, and loading issues. The document is geared for approval by RUS. This document will be sent to Rodney Peach. Once Rodney Peach, if he has any changes, it'll go back to the engineering firm, then back to us, then hopefully it'll get to RUS. The sooner this gets to RUS, I'm not saying this is the avenue to borrow money, but without this plan being approved by RUS, we cannot borrow money from RUS. So whether we end up borrowing money from them or not, the plan has to be submitted and approved by RUS. That gives us the option to do it. In the years past, we've always done a 4-year work plan. We have not hired ICP. We've done it in-house. And we've sent it to Rodney Peach. He looks at it and says, okay, this is for what you guys are doing, good enough. This time we have to go to RUS in Washington, DC and get it approved. I'm a glass half full person. I believe we can get this through much quicker through RUS, but in the past we've submitted it and really not followed up. On this kind of time frame, whether it's RUS, CFC, CoBank, staff has to stay engaged and say, okay, where are you, RUS? And talk to Rodney Peach and talk to Washington, DC. When we're in Washington, DC on other visits, we have to be there in RUS's offices saying, hey, put our project on top. You have to get this by. And then we need Joel, for an example, when we're working through bond council to make sure it's pushed through as soon as possible. We need the commission to work through their contacts. So it really does take all of us to get it pushed through. And I think it can be pushed through in 6 to 8 months. That's very quickly, but it is possible. The booklet is talking about substation, transmission, distribution, and loading. Today, we're going to start with the substations. We're going to talk specifically about a new substation we need to build and then upgrades into old substation. There are some projects at the end of this booklet that are geared for outside this 4-year work plan or prior to the loan being approved. We have some projects we have to get done either way, the transformer swap. So next slide.
I had a question on
Oh.
the transmission I didn't get through the entire document, but I did see let's see, it's page 16 of the packet. It says, under transmission, I think it's the executive summary, to assess long-term transmission requirements and contingencies operations, a long-term study should be performed to anticipate transmission upgrades and expansion requirements. Continued growth will likely require expansion of the 115 kilovolt transmission system. So that's referring to additional studies that
Correct.
might be necessary. Is there an idea when that might need to happen, or what kind of, is that beyond the 4-year time frame, or?
Beyond the 4-year time frame, right now, our transmission system is very stable. They're short runs, so we're not having any transmission problems today. That is why they didn't study it for this go around.
Okay. Please continue.
For many in the northern Quimper Peninsula, it was a quiet Friday evening. No wind, no rain, and a home show on the calendar for the very next day. Then, out of nowhere, everything went dark. Now, it came right back on, but that blip was a sign from our substation regulator here at Hastings Substation telling us that it was struggling. This unique 3-phase regulator had worked 24/7, 365, and was manufactured in late 1969. That's 55 years and 4 months of regulating voltage for customers in the Port Townsend to Cape George area. Fortunately, the regulator held out long enough for our substation team to redistribute load to nearby substations and take the Hastings sub offline. With one substation offline and high morning energy usage in full swing, we began to see outages due to failure of some aging components. This led to the larger outage we experienced. Throughout all of Saturday, crews worked to carefully distribute load to get everyone back on, and by 7:20 p.m., everyone had been restored, but the work had just begun. The following day, a 60-ton crane was brought into the Hastings substation behind me, and line crew assembled to remove the old 32,500-pound regulator and place 3 new regulators. With everything in place, our substation team energized the Hastings sub, and all was returned to normal. Thankfully, the replacement of large-scale devices like this are rare, and it's one of the reasons why our team is working on essential infrastructure projects to improve reliability for decades to come. Jefferson PUD, connecting our community.
Kevin, does that regulator have any reuse, rebuild opportunities, or is it so old it's not have any value anymore?
We chose not to rebuild it. And there's a couple reasons. That regulator is so heavy, we don't have a crane or a digger truck that can lift it up, so we have to bring somebody in. With the smaller regulators, the single phase ones versus a 3-phase regulator, it allows us to set them with our own truck, so in an emergency, we can come in and move them around. Also, and this is something I believe in wholeheartedly, especially with a large residential load like we have. If you regulate each phase at the end of the line, your voltage is better.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you're just monitoring one leg and raising all three up or down accordingly. So the three-phase regulators actually give us more capabilities than a three-phase regulator. And the
Say
age.
that again?
shows
Well, when you have
three-phased
individual, you
phase-
can,
individual phases versus one large.
Got it.
three-phase
one unit that
regulator.
has to be run together.
It
And
runs
it's regulated
together.
all three, but all three are the same.
Correct.
And with individuals, you can modify each leg a little bit.
Each leg gets modified.
Okay. And where we have some of those neighborhoods are split off on one leg. So you
Correct.
may have different usage on those legs.
End of the line, it really helps to go with the single phase regulators versus an LTC or an old three-phase regulator.
Okay, thank you.
For an RUS loan, it is required to have a 4-year work plan, but it will keep the PUD on task, on track, and it is a funding mechanism for other people. We've talked about that. Next slide. Our 4-year work plan is laid out per RUS requirements. So these are 740C codes. And so new line construction is the hundreds, the 200s. So you lay it out per the type of work being done. And at the end of each column, there grouping, you can see how much you're going to spend per year on that particular item. This does give staff some flexibility, and you can move things around. If we can't get to a project this year, we can move it to 2026 and possibly bring a 2026 project into 2025. So there is things you can do. On an RUS approved document, though, we would have to work with RUS, Rodney Peach, and Washington DC as if we move things around. The funding, like we talked about, would be what we used, we would borrow. So you wouldn't borrow all $60 million. In this case, you would borrow 12 million in 2025 is what we're predicted to borrow. And these are places where staff can work closely with FCS to come up and say, okay, these new feeders we have to do. But you go down and you look at, for example, the new facilities here, the new warehouse. You could say, hey, we're not going to do that, or if we do, it will be at the end of the construction project, not at the first. So there are ways to defer costs and still accomplish the needed goal. So next slide. These are examples where we're going to convert overhead to underground 300s. And for example, that could be on Marrowstone Island. If you accomplish the undergrounding at Marrowstone Island, it will help with voltage at the end of the line. And it will also help with, in the study, if you look at it, called for reconductoring. We're not going to reconductor, we're going to underground that circuit. It accomplishes the same thing.
What is reconductoring?
Reconductoring is putting a bigger overhead wire up on the poles, which is called, that would help on the voltage. Instead of going with a small wire, you go with a bigger wire. So,
And a bigger wire, you have less voltage drop over
less
the
voltage drop
distance.
over the distance.
Yeah.
And so those are things that staff and FCS can work together to try to keep our costs lower at the first, to keep all these projects moving forward. Ultimately, the goal is the same, is to have, adequate voltage at the end of the line, make sure when we have an outage, we can switch in a different way to keep people on. Those are the goals. And even that's laid out in the work plan. Project 401 is key though for a lot of what we're doing. That's the new substation out by the paper mill. That would have given us switching capabilities from 2 weeks ago when we lost the regulator. If that substation would have been in place, it would have allowed us to pick up the load and not have the voltage problems. When you start having voltage problems, there's just too much load at the end of the line, the voltage goes down. And what we did is we burned up some jumpers from where two lines come to hit on a pole, they're dead ended, you jumper from one to the other. There's a connector and we lost some connectors. So in 2025, the $3 million, that doesn't give us very much work there. That allows us to start buying equipment and some engineering costs, but we may have the engineering already completed by the time this plan is approved for loan. So that's dollars we'll have to use for our normal capital work. Next slide.
Just a quick question. Where do we stand on the acquisition and permitting on that property?
So permitting, we've talked to them, the permitting, they gave us verbal. We are still going through the process on permitting, and Joel may be able to give us an update. He's working directly with the county legal person, Singer, I think.
I can weigh in if you want.
Please do.
The county's largest concern is that this project get completed and the purchase and sale happen before Kevin's departure. I think we can make that happen, but it's really important that we actually apply for the permit.
So
I think there's some sort of, minor conditional use permit required, but we need to apply for it.
So they're waiting for us to apply.
And
Yeah, and then we have a pretty much simplified agreement that I know we can, once we get the green light after the permit, we can wrap that up really quickly.
And Eric Pryor and I talked last week. He's applying for the permit so that the permit number then can be given to Joel and work through all these. We feel comfortable the county will work with us to make this happen in a very timely fashion.
Okay, and you don't need any further action by the board to proceed.
Not until we have the agreement.
Yeah,
Once
not till then.
it'll come back to you for authorization.
Okay.
There are some substation changes. For example, you'll see 501 is to change out the regulators at Hastings substation. We've already spent that $500,000 2 weeks ago, so that can be removed from that because we'll have to eat those costs because it was done prior to the loan going through. I want to point out too, on Hastings substation, quite a bit of concrete has to be poured when you go to single phase regulators versus the 3-phase. The spacing is so much larger. That was done probably 4.5 years ago by our substation crew, hoping we would get a long life out of the regulator, but just in case, it allowed us to quickly make changes. So even though you're seeing and we're talking about these are things that have to be fixed and they're known problems, we are or have taken steps to make it easier to do a change or to make a fix in an emergency if we have to. The next thing I'm just going to bring your attention to real quickly is Marrowstone Island Regulator Bank. We're talking about putting a regulator bank halfway down the island, kind of reconfiguring some stuff. In the documentation, it talks about a new regulator bank there. Depending on what happens, it was designed for 2026, but that may be bumped up to 2025, depending on other issues we're having at the time. So, and this is where we pick up some of those smaller projects.
So with that involve moving the 3 regulators that are at the bridge up to Mid-Island or adding additional regulators?
So we would add additional regulators somewhere on the island, and there's a formula for this. We may move the regulators going onto the island back towards Oak Bay.
Okay,
Try to pick up at least the base and then maybe some of the neighborhoods prior to, but that's a work in progress. Next slide. We're not gonna go through every line. There are some SCADA equipment on here. It's minimal because a lot of the substation, the brand new, for example, the substation at the paper mill, all of the SCADA equipment is in the 11.6 million. So these are to fix some stuff. We do know we need to really spend some time and upgrade our SCADA system. This is ways to kind of fund those projects, but that's very similar to what we did for our meters. We got an RUS loan for the meters, and if you remember, this funds some of that SCADA projects. Next slide. Here we do throw a little bit of money into transmission items, for example, to change out a transmission pole or guys, those kind of things. But as a whole, there's very little transmission work on here. In years past, we've always had some fiber work that we've done on our 4-year work plan. But because of the expansion in broadband, we have left all those dollars out. Next page. So this is a little bit what FCS was talking about. In 2025, we're looking at borrowing $12.7 million. In 26, $25.9 million. You can read them. So that's kind of how we've looked at spending the money. There are ways to, I'm not going to say defer costs, do a small fix that would allow us to move a project a couple years in advance. For example, regulators. If we put regulators in at Marrowstone Island, the new feeder to Indian Island is not as important. Still important, so I don't know if that's a good example, but that's some ways you can move projects around. One project in 2026 is a laydown and expansion yard. That's $2 million. When we first started this project, that was to change the yard out here with temporary fencing and move it back over here to by our substation. That's an easy one to say, okay, we're gonna move it down to 2027 or even take it off our project list, depending on how the other projects go. Sooner or later, we're gonna have to expand our laydown yard because we don't have enough room, but those are things that'll future discussion.
And again, what was that? It says building too. So would that be enclosed storage or what's the idea behind the
So-
building there?
Over here originally was gonna be a fiber laydown yard. It was just gonna be a big warehouse. Now we've talked about putting some offices and some stuff on one side, have a mezzanine so you could, kind of the old warehouse where you have a couple offices, a mezzanine to put things. That's what we're talking about there is a building primarily open for materials, but some office space in it.
Would it replace what we've got here? On the
No.
backside of this building?
We may move those people over, but that material would probably stay.
Okay.
So looking at that sheet you've got, or that scale you've got up there, how well does that harmonize with the option we picked earlier today? If we were to go with the S4, the original cost, capital improvement program plus the 30-year bond, how does this match up with that scenario?
I don't quite know your.
Well,
question.
you're showing the yearly amounts that you need. If we were to borrow, because in the one we looked at earlier, we borrow most of the money in 26.
Is it
Is
consistent?
it gonna be, are you gonna, I know you got flexibility. I get that.
This was given to Sergey to put together their plan.
So this is
So
consistent.
This is consistent with the plan that Sergey had.
Okay.
Okay, just making sure that
Some of those numbers that Sergey was using was done before all of this was completely.
But they're minor changes.
Or yeah,
from
minor
when-
changes.
But it
there is
has
a little bit
been
of,
harmonized with each of the options that were brought forward.
Yep.
And going by what you've told us today about the Hastings, we spend money already, you could move things around and the other things, the flexibility you have. Looking at the totals you're showing here, does it still match up with being able to do the things we need to do, we know, and the way the money potentially could get borrowed? That's kind of what, or leveraged, or whatever term you want to use.
This is the document that we will send to RUS. This is what we will finalize with Sergey. But with Sergey, we'll spend the extra time to say, okay, we're not even gonna work on the laydown yard till 2028 and push the rest off into the 10-year work plan. So there's things like that that we will do with Sergey that'll help us a little bit with the upfront costs in the first couple years.
Okay.
But not defer the substation.
I see what you did, but I had to ask the question just to make sure that everyone's cross-referenced and looked and harmonized everything, that we're not hearing two different things.
This is complicated and has been drawn out long enough. You are gonna hear two different things because, you know, we've presented a lot of this to the board before, and there are old stuff out there. This is the newest, greatest as of today. Most of what we're trying to do is safe, reliable, cost-effective power. And that's what our work plan is built on. The outage 2 weeks ago really drills home. We have to be prepared for emergency, but if we're prepared, it keeps everything to a minimum. And that's what a work plan gives you, is prepared for the future. Next one. We talked a little bit about this. This is the new substation site. The squares are what we're talking about purchasing from the county. To me, there's things we can do today that makes it so that this substation doesn't have to be built today, but this is a key substation. This $11.5 million has to be done sooner than later. This needs to be done within the 4-year work plan.
And a refresher on budget, what was the price of the purchase included in this year's budget?
Yeah, in this year's budget, I believe we have $3 million, and don't quote me, maybe Joe can remember. I think we're less than $100,000 for the property.
Okay.
And you've got an easement there on the south side of that.
That's where the transmission lines go through.
Okay.
Transmission and the water line, which helps us actually.
So it's a county owned property, but it's encumbered partially by a city mill.
Yep.
Transmission easement, whatever.
So how much difference does it make in terms of the urgency of building the substation, given the fact that the governor wants to go much slower on the electrification of the ferry system?
This does not help us one bit on the ferry system, because this just gives us the capability to backfeed Hastings substation during a major outage during the winter. So the reason it's priority is for backing up Irondale, Dana Roberts, and Hastings, not the electrification of the ferry. Next slide. And I think some little fly-ins will jump in there. I don't know how to make them do that. This is approximately the load area of the mill under normal circumstances. Dana Roberts, you can see where that substation normally feeds. Hastings where it normally feeds, and then Irondale. To me, this helps illustrate why we chose the site, not only because of proximity to the transmission line and that kind of stuff. The property was in an area that well suited that. But you can see where it sits in nicely to pick up Irondale, Hastings, or Dana Roberts if we lose feeders. Plus, at that site, it gives us an existing feeder to the hospital, which is great to have. It gives us a direct feed across to where Irondale and Hastings come in together. That area, Cape George, is where we had a lot of problems from trying to feed from Irondale. And this puts us close enough that we wouldn't have the voltage problems we did last weekend. Next slide. The Quilcene substation needs to be upgraded because of we've exceeded the capacity of nameplate. We also need to take some load off a Chimicum substation. We're putting the new transformer we bought in this bay now in the transformer swap, but the overall goal is to turn this into a 2-bay substation with redundancy to help pick up a lot of the Chimicum load if we lose the Chimicum substation or a feeder. And with the new transformer and the new bays, we'll be able to do that. For example, we can backfeed up through and pick up Swansonville, stuff like that. At present, we don't have that capabilities. Next. Right now, it's a 5 megawatt. Let's skip it, yeah. Yep. The new bay actually goes away from the road. We're gonna raise it up because when the Little Quill floods, it puts about 2-3 inches of water in our substation. So we'll build what you see in the red square first, and then we will raise the existing station and basically start over from there. Next slide. Port Ludlow substation. We're hoping to go to and do the witness testing for the substation transformer. This is the one that failed that we've had rebuilt. We think it's going to be rebuilt in late April, mid-April. We will go do witness testing, and then that transformer will come sit here. The red shows where we're going to do the expansion. We have to refence. There's a lot of work that has to be done. This is really crucial because Breaker Lane and those areas at the end of our system, we can't pack from Chimicum substation the way it sits now. It's just too far away. So if we have a problem in the substation, I can pick up a lot of people on Swansonville, but I can't pick up the end. With the second bay there, it increases our odds that we'll be able to pick those people up during emergency situation. And part of this new configuration is additional outgoing feeders to tie into Breaker Lane and some other areas down around the store and stuff.
And is the plan still to go overland with those new feeders or to stay along the existing transmission system?
We'll cut across the back side to feed them, and there's actually a drawing here later on that will show you. Chimicum substation, we're talking about a new feeder coming out of Chimicum substation. It's the feeder that's gonna feed Indian Island, Maristone. Some of these upgrades aren't in our 4-year work plan, but the new feeder out will be to get us to Indian Island. Part of that has been completed by the PUD, though. We've installed some conduit. We have easements. We're looking at we've spent quite a bit already. We still need to spend about 5.8 million to build all the way from the substation underground to Oak Bay. And then from Oak Bay to the Navy base, so we can split that load.
And are all these costs at 2025, or is there inflation built into these costs?
All of these costs are 2025 numbers. There's a few that are older that are 2024 numbers, but they are in the documentation. It kind of calls out whether it's 2025 numbers or 2024. So we will have to add inflationary numbers onto them. So on our transmission line, we do have some older insulators. Our system used to be at a lower voltage, and when they increased the voltage to 115, in some areas, the insulators were left at the lower voltage. Occasionally, we do have some problems with tracking, so we're bringing this as part of our overall transmission work. Some of this will be on that project. We're getting into very specific problems here on the distribution side. The distribution portion of our documentation really looks at loading, whether it's voltage issues or not being able to bring people back up during outages. We have short-term solutions and longer-term solutions. Without going into a lot of detail, voltages on Maristone can be fixed with regulators. Breaker lane really has to have the new feeder building out of the substation to bring it up to peak. And the substation transformer needs to be added. Couple of diagrams. The one on the right shows the coming out of the substation at Chimicum, coming across. The green, the conduit's already in. The red would be new conduit and wire, and that would get us to the vault on right at the bridge. Next slide. We're going through this pretty quick. If you have questions, throw them out there. We may get through this. What time? Oh, it's 12:03.
Just keep going.
So on Maristone, in the plan, it calls for reconductoring, putting a bigger wire there, because we're already looking at doing the undergrounding. When we put the fiber on there, we would just use a little bit bigger conductor. We still would probably have to have a reclosure on the underground portion, and you can buy underground regulators, just any other piece of equipment. So that's part of a long-term project. That one's been going on for a really long time, trying to fix not only Maristone. We have one feed that feeds Maristone, Indian Island, and most of Port Ludlow. We need to break that up. The minute we break it up, outages are reduced, voltage goes up, and there's a lot of improvement that'll happen once we build those other feeders through there. Next slide.
I know we got the state park out there. Just out of curiosity, I know this is out of our realm, and that's land use. How much can the load on Maristone expand? Is there anyone have a number out there as to what expected? How many areas could be built out with single-family homes, that sort of thing? Do we have a number that we think how close to maxed out Maristone is for the amount of load that's going to have to go out there?
I've seen some documentation of buildable lots, in the county. I'll have to research that a little bit. We don't have, there's not a lot of room for expansion in Maristone today. If they change some of the county requirements, there could be more expansion.
So it's to firm up what's there, not really looking as far as growth.
So
Is that fair to say?
if you look at this on voltage, you can see we are at minimum voltage today. Where that 7 is, that's a problem. We have to fix that regardless if they build a new house or not. So Infrastructure, we're talking about short-term, for example, a regulator. And the regulator would probably go around about that number 5 on this map. That just brings all the voltage back up to where it should be under normal growth. This is during our low temperatures and that kind of stuff. So no, Dan, it doesn't really figure in the, let's say you can put 40 houses there, and I know you can't, but that would be additional load.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to see us overbuild expecting that there'd be growth if there isn't going to be any growth. That's just kind of where I was looking at it, so.
The red dot is the regulator location. It's right before you cross the island. It's still on the Navy base. This is our regulators can tap 16 up, 16 down. They can raise or lower voltage. So at this time frame, we were at 16 for those time periods. Now, a couple things we did do this year during our cold snap, we increased voltage at the substation. That means incoming voltage is higher at the regulator, so you don't hit the tap. So we did make some adjustments after this where the tap was changed at the substation. It would help keep the voltage at the end of the island a little better.
And again, what was the timeline on that? Regulators for the middle of Maristone?
In the 4-year work plan, it was in 2026.
Okay,
But now that we've done the study, it may move a little bit.
okay. And the conduit's already in, so you literally just have to get
Some of the conduit is in for the feeder coming from Chimicum to Indian Island, but a lot of it's not.
Oh, okay,
So we would just put the regulator on the pole.
okay.
This is Port Ludlow Breaker Lane. Dan, your question earlier, whether we follow the existing lines, we don't. We come back out through and come away from Beaver Valley Road and come that way.
And how close to having the ability to do that are we from a right of way or?
Not very far. We've talked to DNR a couple times. That's part of the problem with some of these projects. We kind of go down the path and then we don't tie DNR up and say, okay, we have to have a solution. Moving forward, as we put people in charge of these projects, there has to be follow-up. There has to be a lot more dedication. It's hard because we have so many projects to keep focused on all of them. And this is one that has really fallen off the radar because with DNR, it takes a lot of work to get that permit through. It's tough.
So we have an application with them, but
We
it's,
don't have even an application. We've talked to them about the routes and the
Okay.
best ways to go. Because sometimes on the preliminary stuff, you can get them to kind of agree. It makes it so much easier than applying and then them saying, you can't do this. Off of Coyle Road, we spent almost 2 years trying to work with them to get some easements, and it up front, they should have just told us, hey, we're never gonna give you this, you have to go this other direction, because we had options there.
okay.
And we do have options here, but this is our preferred option. Again, 5.2 million, everything is very expensive. Next slide. Breaker Lane, we're just showing you the peak usage. We can pack Breaker Lane during the coldest day of the year. The problem happens when we have an outage. The minute we have an outage and it's cold, it takes 6 to 8 hours to re-energize it because we have to take it in such small blocks. So if we could split the load in half. Half feeding the way it is now, half coming up the golf course, the other drawing we showed. That's approximately 200 amps per leg. You can almost pick that up instantaneously. So part of the need at Breaker Lane is to allow us to pick up load during non-typical configurations. So,
And that is an area that's being built out up in the Teal Lake area,
this is
correct?
the one that causes me some concern because a lot of the growth we'll see in the coming years will be in this area.
Mhm.
It's just gonna get worse so here, our feeder lines will be bigger than for say on Marrowstone Island.
And this is also support for the whole capacity charge thing that we passed, you know, all those new homes helping to pay a little bit of the fair share of these kinds of improvements.
Yeah, this is 5.2 million for a very select group.
Yeah.
There's a lot of homes there though, and so, this will be overbuilt.
Yeah.
For this stretch.
And I guess, so is there a staffing or a structural challenge with the PUD right now that's preventing us with being able to pursue the DNR deal? Or is it just, you got so many things going on, we don't have enough people to prioritize everything?
3-4 years ago, a team of us met and trying to come up with solutions specific for Breaker Lane. There was 3 or 4 different ideas. We couldn't get everyone really on the same page
Within our own PUD?
with our own PUD, which then makes it extremely difficult to have somebody really champion it to say, okay, you've got to get these permits. This is our timeline.
Yeah. Cause it seems like the Mill Road, it's such an emergency. We've prioritized it. We've got Joel on it. We've got people working on it to get, so it's moving.
It's moving.
But it seems like the Breaker Lane one, I'm just kind of wondering.
Breaker Lane has been identified for years. It's taken a back seat. Moving forward, this is where we have not done as well in the past as we should have. And this is a place where the board can really hold staff's feet to the fire by saying, okay, you've identified these things.
Yeah.
You gotta make some progress. And progress will be slow there, because, you know, you're dealing with DNR, homeowners, there's a lot to work with the state, WASDOT, you know, crossing roads, that kind of stuff. But we need to shift how staff shares information with the board.
Sure.
And get more into detail on these.
Well, let me put you on the spot a little bit. You know, you're going to be gone before too long. Is this one that you see is going to be resolved with all the pieces put in place of what needs to happen before you go? Or is this going to be hanging on that the next manager is going to have to deal with?
Jameson was at a conference that DNR happened to be across the booth last Saturday. Yeah. He talked to DNR. I believe this one, based on growth and other things, need to really move up our food chain to take a priority. I think we can be in a better place before I leave, but it won't be where it should be.
But see, this, again, this is this pushing things out, it's cause and effect. We took 1.5 years to decide on the new fee. You know, we pushed things out because we didn't want to increase rates. You know, this is cause and effect of the mentality that we've put things off for too long. And you're right, this is another one of those ones where this is why the pain we're going to feel is going to happen. There's no two ways around it. We've kind of stretched things out and pushed things out now for too long. And this is, to your point, this is one, put Kevin on the spot. I think he's being optimistic.
Well,
that we need to take action now is
Well,
where I'm going with
I'm
this.
kind of wondering, I mean, feels a little bit like an Eagle Ridge thing almost. I don't want an army of Port Ludlowers in here because all of a sudden the power's flickering or whatever. And I'm wondering, do you just need to pick a project manager, empower them more, and start setting milestones for them, helping them manage this and get going?
So
Because it sounds like it needs that. It needs a little more fire under it.
So you're putting me in a hard spot. Just picking a project manager.
And you don't need to
champion.
name a name,
No,
but I
I'm not
mean,
gonna name
no
it.
name names.
We,
I've got a doctor's appointment.
Okay, thank you, Ken, for being here. Did you have any other concerns before you go with what's?
A lot of concern.
Okay, have a good day.
To just assign this to somebody really isn't the way to go.
Okay.
We need somebody that, one, is passionate about the project, and two, that can get things done. And that not only means empowering them, but they have to have available time. And a lot of our people are busy. In a coming board meeting, we're gonna talk about some of this stuff. How do we really not only set it as a priority, but how do we communicate that we're actually working on them? Because that in itself goes a long way. If we talk about these projects and where they are, then we will get a better response from staff and consultants to say, okay, we have made progress. We sat down with DNR on Wednesday of last week. You know, that's what we need. We need key projects like this one talked about in regular board meetings.
Well, of all the projects and things that you've talked about, none of them have triggered a warning with me except this one. Because all the rest of them, it seems like there's a plan. We know why we're doing it. We are identifying the funding. We have a rough timeline on making it happen. This one, I'm kind of hearing things that are making me feel like this could continue to slide because we haven't fully fleshed. We've got parts of the plan. We kind of know the but it seems like there's a few missing pieces here that are kind of critical to getting it.
Well, part of the reason
done.
we logged it was toward this end.
It is towards this. We put some things in place, but you're right, Jeff. We haven't, we have not gotten to the point where we can say, okay, we need to move forward.
Well, now it's just Dan and I. So, I would like Eagle Ridge, we were basically saying, what's the update? What's the update? So I think, defer to you on which board meeting, but Dan, would you agree that you would like to have at a board meeting when we have some time, an update on this and where it stands and what's remaining on it, and maybe some information about, hey, if we delay this for 2 years, these are the bad things that could happen, versus if we proceed with it at hopefully a pace, this is when it could happen. Because it seems like we've got, with this plan, we're identifying funding for this. So for me, it's like, okay, how do we execute that, and what are the missing pieces? What do you think?
Yeah, whatever meetings we need to have to get these things figured out, we should be doing.
Okay.
Right, first and foremost.
This,
And then I also,
just this project though, we need to give you a handful of projects where
Okay.
we give you the update.
well, I made a
Okay.
request to Kevin if he wants to tell them what I asked you for. Maybe this plays into Jeff. After I read the plan a few days ago, I had Kevin and I met, and I made a request to him, and I says, this just something that you can think about. If you need board approval, do it.
Mhm.
But if you want to tell him what the discussion we had was.
So for the RUS, the form we put here,
Mm-hmm.
it works for me. I thought it was just, top drawer. I really did.
Right.
Or top shelf. Dan asked for a little different detail, more, okay, this is really a project that needs to be done. This
Mhm.
is the age of our infrastructure. This is why it has to be completed in a short time frame.
Right.
A little more detail per project versus the bigger picture.
Sure. Well, I guess the only concern I would have with that is I don't want to slow down us getting the 4-year plan to RUS.
No, and that was.
However,
That was the discussion we had. It
Yeah.
was not an immediate ask. This was something in addition to this that we should be thinking about and looking for.
right. However, so we've got this 4-year plan, we've sent it to RUS. How we execute that plan, getting regular updates from staff on how we're executing that plan. I think that's where we should be getting more detail and making sure we're following up. Would you agree? Does that sound?
Mine, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Mine was a bit more inventory related. We've heard the word nameplate used today.
Yeah.
We've seen 1169, to understand the infrastructure that we have
Mhm.
and where we are with that infrastructure, we don't have enough detail to that level of granularity to determine what is the priorities. And we hear a lot of things, but it's more the 30,000. What I asked of Kevin was a little more detail of
Sure.
what exactly to justify where the projects really do need to be focused more.
Well, I think, we do these things that I think have really helped the board understand complex projects. One of them has been the budget. The way we've broken the budget down to quarterly updates, I think has really helped us when we get to budget adoption time. Will has done a good job on broadband, keeping us tuned in. I think because you're leaving, because we've got this gigantic ball of construction projects in this next 4-year time period, I think we should utilize this time. And again, it's kind of up to you, and you can work with me on when we bring these to the board, but I think we probably need to continue this conversation about the projects, little updates, like maybe on the Hastings or on the Mill Road substation. It's just like, yep, here's the update. The permits are in. Here's what the county's telling us. And with any of these other ones that are complicated, like Breaker Lane, maybe just start giving us a little bit of regular updates, and that can give us the opportunity to say back to you, yes, please go, and it gives you the incentive to look at our staff or our consultants or whoever. What are the missing pieces here? Who can step up?
You bring up consultants. I do think these are places where there are some local consultants that could help us on these type of.
Because they're limited time and scope,
Yeah.
and you kind of need that consistent attention. And there are people with skill sets that can do that sort
Well,
of
you
thing.
brought it up earlier. There's studies that are called out in this early on of really which ones are the studies that need to be done and should be done.
Right.
Because we're on an engineering path at the moment, but do we need to divert on the engineering to something really that is more critical than we believe or think that it is?
Yeah. So anyway, please keep going, but I think red flag on Breaker Lane. It's like, I think we need to give it some more oomph. So
This particular project is not in the 4-year work plan. It's something though that needs to be done. And what we're talking about is transfer shuffle or transformer shuffle. We hope that the Quilcene substation transformer is put together by the end of March, which would allow us to move that transformer into place in April. Once we move the transformer over to Discovery Bay, you move the transformer, you have to let it set for a day to let the bubbles get out of it. So maybe the next month we would take the 20 MVA out of Discovery Bay and move it to Dana Roberts. The Dana Roberts, if we had Bay 2 done and we build a couple outgoing feeders to intertie, that gives us a little bit of time to work on middle substation.
puts us in a better position next winter than we were this last winter. Yep.
It doesn't fix everything, but it allows us to have a construction period. So the transformer shuffle is really key to allowing us to move forward productively.
Yeah.
I can give you some updates. We've got the steel towers for Dana Roberts. The we hope maybe in April we could move the transformer. We are moving there, should be finishing up engineering within the next couple weeks. But those are, they're the positives. We're gonna have things ready to go there. The hard part is we're funding all of the engineering, all of the steel towers, all of this
Yeah.
out of revenue.
Yeah.
In a time where revenue's tight.
Right.
We're trying to work through, the finish up some of the broadband grants.
Yep.
So, that's the give and take.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice that this has been delayed, not because of our schedule, but because of the transformer, construction, that kind of stuff. So, we do think it will happen, early spring. I do think it's gonna be the difference for next winter.
Right.
And I do think this is a very positive project for us moving forward. And this by itself allows us, Wilson substation, we can start packing a lot of load instead of taking it out of Chimicum substation.
Right.
A lot of big value here for the PUD moving forward.
And nothing that you're saying is creating any warning signs with me. It sounds like you got this one, everything, fingers crossed.
Yeah, I'm not
kinda-
saying everything.
right.
Right now, we look good.
Seems like you've got a plan and it's proceeding and it's got enough time to have it ready before winter. Okay.
We were hoping to have it ready this winter, but
Yeah.
not gonna be there. These are some of the things, I will say this substation, Discovery Bay, it's not in a very good place. It sits up on the hill. Our property footprint isn't big enough. This is one substation. We've actually looked at other sites to put a substation in. Short term, it's what we have. It needs some work. We'll do the work. Longer term, 10-year work plan, maybe going out to the 20-year work plan. This site needs to be moved. Where to?
And there's
we don't know.
property next to it, adjacent to it, if it's for sale. I don't know if we've looked at that.
At the time, it was a huge chunk. It was like 64 acre. It was a very large chunk and they didn't want to
Break it up.
break it up. So yeah, we did look at it. Snug Harbor is just down below.
It's a very limited area, and plus you don't want it low because it's a floodplain down there. You have a tsunami or what, you want it you want it elevated to a certain extent.
If you could purchase the property down below and then kind of terrace it a little bit different.
Regrade it.
Yeah, then you kept the height. But that's something that is like I say, it's right on the border of our 10-year and our 20-year work plan.
Okay.
Next slide. This is Dana Roberts, Bay 2. Not only is Bay 2 what we're talking about in the transformer swap, but it's part of the batteries that we're talking about with hydro. It's part of how we would feed the new ferry terminal. It is crucial for a lot of reasons, not only to allow us time to build the new mill substation.
So with the path that the federal government looks like it may be on for the next few years when it comes to green energy, things like the batteries, I mean, how far out are we with thinking about whether we're really going to be able to put batteries in there or not?
I believe we should continue on the path for batteries. If the ferry comes in, we have to have them. We cannot do it without batteries. But there's also some benefits to batteries if we can, during extended outage, feed the hospital, for example. There's things like that the batteries do make sense to us.
I guess part of my question is, will there be funding out there for that? Or is that something we'd be footing the bill for on our own?
I believe there's gonna be funding for our hydro project and for batteries.
And this is,
that kind of
this is like the Energy Northwest discussion we had last time. That one of those items that we would say, hey, be looking for how we could fund this.
Next slide is the hydro.
Okay.
So, and we did have our kickoff meeting with, stakeholders last week with, about the pipeline. I personally believe, the pipeline and the battery backup is ideal for a lot of the grants and stuff that are gonna be available now. There's been a lot of, discussion in a lot of the groups I belong to that, these hydro projects, existing pipeline, that water is being wasted. It
Mhm.
just is going down to, the mill and not being used at all, that these inline power turbines are really gonna be looked upon favorably. It's green energy. It's a resource that's there now.
Right.
You're not putting in a new pipeline. So I think this is one that, Energy Northwest can maybe get behind.
Right.
We'll see. I hope it is. It's an expensive project. But
So do we have a contract with them yet? Have we paid our 7,000 and
we don't have a contract with them yet. I sent them the link to today's saying, okay, we're gonna do.
Okay.
the,
whose court is that ball in? Because they said it's $7,000. Do we, and
Someone was on from Energy
and we-
Northwest.
There's
and-
two people.
oh,
Yeah.
do we have anybody from Energy Northwest online?
Sarah's here and Allison.
Yeah.
Hey, Sarah or Allison, if you guys can jump on quick, we're just kind of wondering what's the next step on getting under contract with you.
Like,
They
somebody
may have
dropped off.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
Well, can you, I mean, the board directed you
Yeah,
to do it.
I think they just have to send us a bill. An
Okay.
invoice saying, hey.
Can somebody on the PUD staff be charged to reach out to her to say, we want it?
Take it.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah,
Okay.
They know we want it. They were invited, they got our package so that they can look.
Okay.
To see what projects maybe are granted.
Maybe we just scared them and they jumped off. As a joke, I'm sure they're very happy to help us. Okay.
This cost has gone up. When we first proposed, it was like 23.5.
Hmm.
Latest estimate's 28 million. It doesn't pencil out for us to do, but if we
Without-
get grants
yeah.
and, low interest loans, it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I want to join all those utilities that actually make power. So
We're going to DC at the end of April
Yeah.
and we will be making the rounds, correct?
Yeah.
Correct.
yeah, these things take years but until we're like serious about it, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have several reconductoring projects that were identified. Whether or not we reconductor or reconfigure, if we put the mill substation in, we probably don't have to reconductor. There's things we have to look at on all these projects. Next slide. New feeders. Underwater cable to Indian Island, Tamara Stone. Those kind of things, they're all in progress. It's just whether or not we can, make them happen.
Well, we need, and I think that's another one we need help with. We need funding for that. We're not going to probably do that on our own.
Underwater cable, is for the base. The
Yeah.
base has, not that it helps us tremendously on Maristone.
Right.
Gives us another feed. But that would almost have to be an appropriations through
Yeah.
the Navy.
So I have a question. I don't know where it fits into these things, but it was again in the part of the plan that I read. It talks about power factor correction, and the sentence reads, due to load growth, power factor correction is an ongoing concern. Jefferson PUD should evaluate its power factor on a yearly basis and capacitors added when the power factor drops near a contractual requirement. And I didn't know what that meant.
So power factor tells you how you're using your power.
Okay.
So, end of the line, you have the paper mill.
Right.
And if their power factor is 95, let's say, the capacity on the wire is exactly what they're using.
Okay.
If their power factor drops down to 60, the amps on the wire are a third higher. So instead of 100 amps, there'll be 130 amps on it.
Yeah, more amps on there than you really need to have on there for the use at the end of the line. Okay.
So with power factor correction, you can put capacitors on the line that will, on this side of the capacitor, it'll be 100 amps. On this side, it'll be 130. So
Okay.
it
It's kind of like the voltage regulator. It's modified. Okay.
Voltage regulator is a transformer that taps the load up and down. It only works on voltage.
Right.
Capacitors work on amps.
Right.
It takes the amps and reduces them, or takes power factor to 0.
And by reducing those amps are available somewhere else, the idea is?
So when we fed Hastings out of Irondale, it was such a long line, and the voltage drop and everything, the wires are literally too small for what we're
Right.
trying to do. If you have capacitors at the right locations, it will allow you to keep the voltage high at the end of the line. It takes the amps, and I've seen it where there was 200 amps coming out of the substation. You put a capacitor bank out there and it dropped it to 100 amps. So you could put twice the load at the end of the line.
Okay. Well, to me, it's sort of the same thing. It's a voltage regulator regulates voltage, a capacitor regulates the amps. And the amount of power that you're delivering is the amps times the volts. So it's just allowing you to right size both the amperage and the voltage for the system. Okay, that's helpful.
Most of our lines during the winter, because we're a residential load, our power factor is pretty good. There are times where it's bad, and there's times where we go leading. So lagging or leading hurts you.
So just adding capacitors in different places could help us depending on.
Ours would have to be thinkers. Ours would have to monitor it and turn themselves on and off.
Okay.
They couldn't be fixed capacitors.
So our system isn't really there yet to having.
No, our system's there. It's just because we fluctuate so much, it would have to be smart capacitors where they know to turn themselves on and off.
Okay.
The new proposed substation site lends itself well to the undersea
Right.
cable to Indian Island.
Right. If that ever came to be. Okay.
If that came to be, we would then install, and this is about where our water line, we have a water line that crosses over to Flagler, and it's about this location also, and follow the same path as our water line.
And how does it help the Navy again?
Um,
If it was there?
So the Navy is on a feeder that trips out a lot.
Okay.
This would be a direct line to the Navy, and it would not be weather related because it would be an all underground.
Okay.
circuit.
More reliable.
More reliable.
Okay. I think we've kind of peppered you with questions the entire time.
And we, like I say, we went through that really quick. Sorry.
No, it was fine. It was fine. Do we have any questions of folks who are still online? I don't know if you can call up the screen. I can't really see anybody. Is there any questions of the public? At this point, all these things are probably going to come back for future discussion, but if there's questions now, Tom?
Yeah, thanks. I really like the idea of more regular reporting, especially on these really critical efforts, keeping everybody apprised of progress and so forth. It's a great idea. I have one little nit to pick maybe with the construction plan. The 100 series of projects, which are basically, new home construction, aren't those supposed to be funded by the capacity charge? So in terms of putting them into the cost of the capital program, it seems like you might be double counting there, but it's only 2.5 million out of a very large number. But I just was wondering about that. Thanks.
Yeah, that should, the capacity charges should give us some additional revenue. I mean, that was the idea behind the capacity charges. We can borrow money to pay for improvements. We can raise our rates to raise revenue to pay for improvements. And the capacity charge is intended to be a third leg to help us raise revenue to pay for those improvements and have growth pay for part of the growth. But I don't think it's double counting because we still have to pay for these things. And we know what the costs are roughly, and where the revenue comes from is a different question. So we're hoping the capacity charges help us.
So capacity charge goes back to the substation. New line construction, for example, if a contractor comes in and is building 5 homes, the PUD can say, okay, you need to put in 1/0 wire. It's beneficial to us to put in 4/0 wire because we know that's a development that's going to build in the future.
Future growth.
So we charge the contractor for the 1/0 wire, we put in the 4/0 wire, and so we do have a lot of costs associated with some growth. So these are trying to look at some of those growths where we either upsize or we put 3-phase in. A lot of times it's just bare conduit.
Right.
We do have online extensions, costs for the PUD is associated with that aren't necessarily covered by the developer or
Right.
the contractor.
Right.
And again, I'll point back. We had consultants, we spent money and they told us what we should do, and we went with 40% of what they told us we should do. So again, sooner or later, the bills come due. I appreciate Tom's point. I know where he's going with that. But in the big scheme of things, it's not that much money at 40%. Even at what we were told we should do, it was not gonna get us where we needed to go. It was just another piece to help us, stretch out the pain of rate increases.
Well, and hopefully as we do budgets in the coming years, we can show that as a line item and see how that's helping us and see numbers on that. All right. Do we have any other questions or comments from the public? Not seeing any more hands. I don't have any more questions. I think we need to, think of a title for this, for your capital plan update, whatever you want to call it. I think we need to hear how progress is being made. And I think the time that you leave is important. And when this new manager comes on board, they're going to be coming in going, okay, what's going on? The more we can do to chart the course for what needs to happen and make those things start to happen, identify the funding, have the, project leaders identified. And if you need to be thinking about, proposing some consultants to come on board, to me, that's part of your executive authority. We've directed you to do these things. And if you feel like you need to bring on somebody temporarily to take the lead on something, just keep us informed. But I think it's, if we don't do it now, it's just going to be a bigger problem later. And you know more about it than the new person coming in will. And they'll probably appreciate the progress you make. So
I referred to it as the binder he's making of putting things in there, like the request I made of.
The 4-year work plan is a huge step for us.
yeah.
It really is.
So I think just keeping us posted, between now and September on how things are going. And like I said, if we have something that's lagging, then we can give it some more attention. All right. Well, did we have anything else on the agenda? Or did we reach the end?
I don't have any other
I don't have any more questions.
comments.
For your work plan and then adjourn. So we see no more comments. We're done. Dan, thanks for staying a little longer, and good job, staff, on this. And thanks everybody. And thank you for taking the lead on the Mill Road project, and keep us posted on how the permitting's going. Okay. So it is now 12:45 and we are adjourned. Thanks everybody.
Thanks, everybody.